So for those who don't know, this is Reverend Dr. Ted Trout-Landen, and he is a Mount Zion member, and just personally, he is, for me, a deep well of insight and wisdom, and I get so much out of the conversations that I have with him, and have benefited so much from his friendship and mentorship over the years. And so I present him to you without any hesitation, but also because he's the most qualified person in the room to talk about this kind of thing. He was the retired director of spiritual care and education for WellSpan Health. He's a board certified chaplain and a certified educator emeritus of the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education. So he's got the goods, and he's really wonderful at what he does. So I commend him to you, and Ted, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. A third of it is true. I am retired. That's the part that's true. So this is my, I don't know, 100th or 150th Zoom call conference kind of thing, but my first time presenting. So let's see how this goes. As Danny said, I do encourage you, if you have questions or you want to pop in, just hit something in the chat box and get her attention, or wave on your screen, and she'll get to you, and we can pause it that way. I do have some time set aside at the end of our time to have questions and dialogue about anything that we talk about here. You all have seen this, got a copy of this paper, I hope. Yeah, everybody seems to be nodding. That's good. That's good. So in our culture, grief has a pretty bad reputation. Who likes to do it? You know, I mean, who likes to experience grief? Not many people. So we're going to talk differently. On the right-hand side of the paper that you're looking at, or the handout that Danny sent out, you'll see it's all blank there under the spiritual value. And that's the part where we're going to be working on tonight, that right-hand side. So if you have a pencil or a pen or some kind of writing device that you want to scribble in there, take some notes, that's fine to go ahead. So the COVID-19 pandemic is an epidemiological crisis, but also a psychological one. While the situation provokes anxiety, stress, and sadness, it is also a time of collective sorrow, says Sherry Cormier, a PhD psychologist who specializes in grief and grief mentoring. She goes on to say, it's important that we start recognizing that we're in the middle of this collective grief. We're all losing something now. And it just seems so true to me to think that we all are losing a lot now. And we could take this group of 15, 16 people, go away on a weekend retreat, non-COVID weekend retreat, and just talk about the losses that we've experienced in the last 2 months around all this. So normally when we talk about grief, we have particular words that we use. And since this is a Zoom call, I'm going to give you some of those words rather than asking for you to give them to me, because I think it'll just slow us down. But I've done this kind of a presentation a number of times, and over the course of years, these are the kinds of things that people say. What are the words that we use when we talk about grief? Sad, I'm lonely, I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm afraid, I'm depressed, I don't know what to do. Those are all words that we use when we talk about grief. So if you think about all those words, is there anybody, I can only see 4 or 5 of you now, but is there anybody who would raise their hand who would like this very moment to go through an experience where you would experience all of those at the same time? No, well, that's a silly question, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. What we've done with those words inside of ourselves is we've put a circle around them and we say, I don't like that, that's bad. We call it bad. And then I was taught you don't do bad things. And so I don't do grief very well. And a lot of us don't do grief very well because it's hard. We don't want to put ourselves into the teeth of that kind of experience. All grief immediately says something's going to change. And change is just the reality that something big has shifted in our lives, and we know it's going to be grief down here down the road, but it's change right now. And you think of the enormous changes. I mean, look, we're doing this on Zoom. Normally we'd be sitting down in the fellowship hall doing something like this, right? Whenever we experience a change, we always experience loss. Always. I challenge you to think of the most positive, wonderful change in your entire life. Marriage, kids, grandkids, ordination, I don't know, whatever it might be. There's loss associated with that change, if you think about it deeply. And change triggers loss, loss triggers grief. And so here we are in this enormous change, experiencing a lot of grief and loss. Now that right-hand side of your page, that spiritual value side, that's what we're going to be really focusing on here today. Because if we attend to the spiritual values in the grief process and recognize them as values and not things to be pushed away from us, we can ultimately experience growth. I'm not saying that it's going to be fun or easy, but if you think about some of the most difficult times in our lives, most of the time I can look back and say, I experienced some real growth in that time. I wouldn't ever want to go through it again, but I've grown from it and grown in it. And one of the things that gets in the way of our seeing this COVID quarantine time as grief and change is that it's so overwhelming and so hard. We want to really push it to the side, and we don't want to look at it and say, how might I experience some growth here? So that is our time for today. So I'm going to put the first 5 pieces up on this screen, and I'll do the other 4 when we get there later. There are 9 phases in this grief process, and you can go through 1 through 9. You can start at 3 and go through 5 and end at 7. Come in and out at any way, and you can be perfectly fine and okay. You do not have to do 1 through 9. And these are just my 9 that I've gotten together over the years. Kubler-Ross has 5, Ken Doka has 7, lots of different models out there. The point for us is that you can enter and exit at any time and be absolutely okay. So the first experience that happens when we have this enormous kind of change is that we go into shock and denial. And think about the things that you say when you're in shock and denial. What's the first thing that you say? Well, it's good you're muted now, right? Oh no, this can't be. I'm sorry, doctor, you got the wrong chart. You walked into the wrong room here to tell me that kind of information. I can't believe that this is happening. Even today, I wake up and I think to myself, I can't believe I can't go anywhere today. Shock and denial. So I have a soda over here on the side. If I poured it on the desk and took a sponge and started pushing the sponge into that soda slowly, that sponge at its own rate would soak up that soda at its own rate. You and I are each sponges that soak up change at our own rates. And that is one of the reasons why change and grief in families are so difficult, because she's soaking it up at a rate that I don't recognize and understand, and she's taking charge of everything, and I'm sitting over here in the corner and I don't know what to do. But both of us are pushing our sponges into the reality of that change and loss at our own rate. So everybody's right and nobody's wrong. Shock and denial, the spiritual value of it is that it is for us God's insulation. If somebody in January had told you You're going to wake up one morning and not be able to go out of the house, have to have your groceries delivered, go to church by video, and doctor's appointments by video, and not see your kids or your grandkids. Say you're crazy. That's too big a reality to take in one fell swoop. And so what we do is, like that sponge, little by little, we soak up the reality of the change. God is providing for us insulation from something that honestly is too big. I mean, think about a major loss other than this COVID in your life. When you first heard about it or were first told about it, a death or a divorce or the loss of a job or some tragedy, there's I can't believe it. And even days and weeks later, there's still that I can't believe it piece that's true in there for it, because we are bit by bit slowly coming to that realization and that reality. I'm going to take a minute and talk about anger here, which is a very common experience in the grief and change process. When you're angry, think for a moment about when you're angry. What do you notice in your body? What happens in your body? Well, one of the things when I'm angry, I'm here, and I want to be over here. I want to be at a different place than where I am. And that gap is like strings on a guitar. It resonates, it hums, it produces a rhythm, an energy in my body when I'm angry. That's my first cue, by the way. I'll get to that in a minute. Remember, the first cue of knowing that I'm angry is I realize in my body I've got more energy than I had 10 minutes ago. The spiritual value of anger is that it is for us creative energy. So when I said that moment when I realize that energy in my body because I'm angry, that's a very important moment, because I have a choice at that moment. And my choice is, what am I going to do with this energy? Can I apply it to closing the gap? Can I apply it to some other gap in my life? One of the things that happens is that, well, just think about the COVID gap that we all have right now. I'm here and we're here, and we all want to be over on the other side, whenever that is. September or January or whenever, when life goes back to normal again, normal, quote unquote. Well, I can't close that gap. I can't make the curve flatten other than what I can do personally about it. But what can I do in that gap to help close it for me? So Danny said she and I have had a lot of conversations in the last weeks, and they've been incredibly helpful to me as well. And I've had so many Zoom personal calls and conference calls with friends and Masons and a group in Texas that I go to once a year. It's using the energy to close the gap in my life. It doesn't make it okay, but it gives me something to do. And for me, I experience it as taking away the edge of the anger. Because think about what most of us were taught about in our early lives about anger. It's not the most positive message, right? So if we can find a way to use that energy to close some of those gaps that get caused by the frustration in our lives, we can seek the spiritual value in anger. So hurt is something that is known all too well to all of us on this call. You don't get to this point in life without having experienced an enormous load of hurt. And usually, when I hurt, first thing I think of are tears, sadness. But oftentimes what happens is that I squirrel it away inside myself. I tell another person maybe. But I don't see any redeeming value in it. It's just hurt, and I want it to go away. I want it to stop hurting. I think one of the reasons that each of us are on this call tonight is because we understand hurt, the spiritual value of hurt, as being a source of compassion. How many times have I seen on the TV news the firefighters lining up in front of the hospitals in New York City, honking their horns and clapping? Why do you think they're doing that? Because they know hurt, because they went through 9/11, because they get it on a very deep level, and that compassionate response comes forth out of their hurt. It's how we do church. It is how we do church with one another. Look at all the great programs that we have going around in Mt Zion and all of our other churches. And I would venture to say they're all focused on compassion towards others. And that comes out of your personal hurt and my personal hurt, and our ability to see the spiritual value in that and to not just stay hurt. Now, inadequacy is a very funny thing to have in a grief process, I think, but hopefully you'll get it once we get into it. I'm aware that my camera's right here, but you all are over here on my side. So if I look over at you here on the side, and I look at each of you, I look at people who are clearly competent and who get it and who understand and who know how to do life, and obviously you are coping well with COVID-19. Because you see, I'm really hit by this, and I feel a little inadequate. And when I feel inadequate, I look at all of you and I say, well, they really have it together. I'm not so much in this. And I'm going to keep going and going and going until I'm no longer in the scene and I have removed myself from community. So I would invite Pastor Jeff and Pastor Danny some Sunday morning, plucking up their courage and saying, welcome, all you inadequate people. I mean, friends, what are we doing there? We are acknowledging our own inadequacy to live this life. At the very least, I say, I need you. I need my community around me. And much more so than that, because we're a community of faith, I say, I need the divine presence in my life, because I really cannot do this life nor navigate this COVID on my own. It is a source of community. It's not a source of adequate people around the circle. It's a source of inadequate people around the circle. And that's what makes us a community. Because if I can let my inadequacy out to you and you can let yours out to me, I don't have to pretend. We can be okay in that time. Think for a moment about the last time when you were afraid, when you experienced fear. It's another question about your body. What did you notice in your body? A story that was told to me some time ago was that a nurse was walking from the hospital to the parking lot, and it was late at night. It was like after midnight, her shift had ended. And she was walking to her car, and there were some dumpsters over in the corner, and she heard some rustling and some voices over there. And all of a sudden she stopped and froze, and she didn't know what to do. And she thought for a moment, should I run? Should I turn and face them? In that moment, the fear she experienced produced in her a sense of excitement. She wasn't having fun. It's not a Hershey Park excitement. That's exciting too, when you're going down the roller coaster and you rediscover your faith all over again. You say, what in the world am I doing here? But her body was excited. She was, in fact, ready to fight or flight. And that fear, that excitement led her to the next piece, is taking a risk. And she said, I've got my sneakers on, I'm running to my car and hitting the panic button. And that's what she did. In that moment, she was trusting that the information she took in that nanosecond of hearing the sounds over there scraping behind the dumpster, and her ability to get to her car, knowing the panic button was in her hand, she had a sense of trust that she was going to get through this in an okay fashion. For her, fear produced a sense of faith and gambling. Gamble's an odd word. We'll talk about it in a minute. But is it perfect? Is it a guarantee that she was going to be okay? No. The same when we sit in our pews or when we're talking with our pastors. Do we know for sure? Is there a guarantee that this is all going to work out and we're going to be okay? No, we don't. We do not know that. It's a gamble of sorts. It's a good gamble, but it's a gamble of sorts. Pause for any questions that are coming while I slip the next slides in.
No questions yet.
Okay, very good. So the next piece in this grief process is guilt. And I grew up sort of in a middle-class suburban home in Camp Hill. 4 of us in the family. And for a long time, I thought my mom was the East Coast distributor of guilt. You know, every time something happened, I was feeling guilty and terrible about myself. And then I met my best friend, Greg, who lives in Cleveland now. He's a Jew, and he said, "You poor Protestant boy, you have nothing. You do not even understand guilt until you're a Jew. You'll never get it." So we often kid about guilt and what it's like. And it's certainly very present in the grief process for us. And I think even very present now in the COVID and quarantine process. Gee, I wish I would have done that, or I wish I would have said that or not said that. I could turn my camera. I have a double door closet right over here on the side that my first resolution when we locked down was, I'm cleaning that puppy out. I haven't opened the doors on the closet. You know, I feel bad about it, but so as people of faith, we all ought to know what the spiritual value of guilt is, right? You get a chance of that. It's forgiveness. My experience is that it's much easier for me to forgive you if you do something and you say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And what do I say? I say, "Forget it. Don't worry about it. I love you. Don't even think about it." But in this COVID time, I think the hardest part of forgiveness is for me to forgive myself. To say I'm a limited, human, finite being. I can only process so much. I can only feel so much. I can only do so much. To forgive myself for being human and for sure saying the wrong thing sometimes or hurting somebody but that's the task in this pandemic time, is to be able to forgive ourselves. So you see depression over there, and I want you to know there are 2 kinds of depression at least. And the first is a major depression, major depressive episode. It's a clinical diagnosis, and someone needs to be in professional treatment and help for that, potentially medicated or not, which are decisions made by clinicians. That's not the depression we're talking about tonight. The depression we're talking about tonight is the normal, natural piece that comes with being sad and down and in the middle of grief. It's not something that necessarily needs treated, although counseling and therapy can almost always help all of us. But a long time ago, I heard an old adage that depression is anger turned in on the self. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting. I never would have come to that. But you remember what we said about anger earlier on, that it's all that creative energy in me. So if I take that energy and I turn it in on myself, well, I'm beating myself up. And when I start that, I don't really want to go do anything. I'm happy to sit and watch TV. I'm happy to go to bed early. I'm happy to sleep all day. I'm happy to eat everything in sight. I'm getting depressed. I'm getting down. The spiritual value of depression is that it should be a sign that jumps up in front of you and says, what or who are you angry with? What am I angry about? With whom am I angry? Because if I can figure that out, I can start mobilizing some of that energy in me, get it out, and start living a little better. I realized that one of the things I was really angry about was this tiny little microscopic virus. We've all seen the pictures of it. It looks like one of those little sticky balls that kids get, that looks pretty innocuous. How can I be angry at that? I should be angry at a person. I could be angry at Governor Wolf for locking us down, or I could be angry. No, because the anger is really somewhere else. It belongs somewhere else. So our job here is to recognize that sign and to say, what am I angry about? What am I really angry about? Who am I angry with? And to begin mobilize and to move out of that depression, sad, having difficulty doing stuff. So physical symptoms. Boy, physical symptoms in grief. This is not an advertisement for WellSpan or any other health system, but whenever we begin a major grief in our life, loss of a person through death or a divorce or a family member or something that you consider major, I think it's always very helpful to enlist a healthcare provider on our side. Because if it's going to be a long-term process, I'm going to eventually somewhere down the road need some help, health-wise, in terms of coping with that. What are the physical symptoms of grief? Well, they're myriad for sure, but I can get a headache. I can get a stomach ache. I can have diarrhea. I can have nausea. I can just not feel myself. I can have flu-like symptoms, but I know I don't have the flu, but everything aches and I'm tired and I just want to sleep. Well, there's one, sleeping all the time. Or its corollary, not sleeping at all. Eating everything in sight, or not eating anything at all. And switching back between all of those, which is kind of crazy making too. This COVID-19 grief process that we are all in is like having a full-time job. And there are some of you on this call that, in fact, do have full-time jobs right now. So imagine in the middle of a full-time job, taking on another full-time job that takes up every ounce of your energy, waking and sleeping time. And they are some of the physical symptoms of grief. The spiritual value is that those symptoms are telling us to slow down. This is a full-time job, my friends. We need each other. We need our God. We need to be able to talk about it. We need to slow down and really seriously take care of ourselves here. Because these physical symptoms, a seminary professor of mine said to me way back when, if God can't speak to you through any other channels, God will finally get to you through your body. And I always thought there was real wisdom in that. I didn't like to admit it, but I've found it true too many times in my life. So let's talk for a moment about acceptance, and then I'll start wrapping up here. Most of the time when we talk about acceptance, we think about resignation, fate. It's like, I just have to get through it. I have to tough it out and get through it. That is not acceptance. That's, in fact, resignation. That's saying, I don't have any options. I don't have any choices. I just have to let it go and accept it. A guy did a study on acceptance, trying to find out what it was. And he brought in people to a large gymnasium. And as everybody came in, they got a box of common school items, a piece of chalk, a pencil, a magnet, an eraser, a paperclip, And there was somebody standing in the middle of this auditorium, and there were two strings. And he said, all right, the goal hanging from rafters. And he said, the goal is to tie the two ends of the strings together. The trouble was those strings were so far apart, they met about 12 feet off of the ground. So people were saying, obviously, you can't do it. Well, the kids who were in there, they started with all of us 65 and above who think we're very wise and intelligent and smart. And, well, don't get smarty pants, because they went to the 50s and 40s and it didn't get any better. But then they went down to the kids, the teenagers, and the kids. One kid went over and tied a pencil here and an eraser here and swung them until they wrapped around each other. One kid tied the magnet here and the paper clip and swung them until they stuck together. My favorite, it's my anti-social personality tendencies, I'm sure. One kid went over, ripped this one down, tied the two ends of the strings together. There were no instructions other than tie the two ends of the strings together. Acceptance is to find or make something useful or creative out of a difficult and challenging situation. You all know how Mothers Against Drunk Drivers got started, right? So parents lost their 17-year-old daughter. I bet if all the incredible things that have happened through that organization over the course of the last 30 or 40 years, however long it's been going, I bet if you went to those parents and said, would you take all those wonderful things that had happened, or would you take your daughter back? They'd laugh at you and immediately take their daughter back. Which is to underscore we're not having fun when we're doing this. It's hard work. It takes all of our being, and it takes each other, bringing each other together and along in this process to help find and make something useful and creative out of challenging situations. So this is I know you're all muted now, but this is, you all know the end of this sentence completion exercise, 8th grade, right? Time heals all, mouth the word so I can see. There you go, wounds. Time heals all wounds. Wrong. Time heals nothing. So if you're having a really, really hard time with COVID and you say, all right, I'm just going to stop everything in my life. I'm going to watch TV. I'm going to wait for 1.5 years until this is all over, and then I'm going to go back to my life again. I will guarantee you one thing. You'll be 1.5 years older, but you won't be healed because you won't have been working the process of the spiritual values in this grief process. So what does heal? Well, that's a silly question because we all know we have a long list of things that heal. Love heals. Loving another and being loved. Talking to each other, talking with our congregation, our pastors, talking with a therapist, talking with our family, our friends. Don't forsake the telephone and the camera for the lack of being able to be face to face. Bunch of folks from my high school, we had dinner together a couple of weeks ago. Everybody got their dinner. We were on Zoom and we ate together. We talked and laughed. We had a great old time. It wasn't as good as being in the restaurant, but it was pretty good. Touch heals. Being touched and touching heals. Prayer heals. So many more things heal. We all have long lists of things that heal for us individually. Give me a sunny day, put me on a bicycle. I'm healed. I'm ready. I'm going, So grief is 3 things. It is normal. It happens every single day. I lost my car keys this morning, and I said, oh, I can't believe I lost my car. Where are they? Beth, have you seen the keys? Oh, man. God, please help me find the keys. If I don't get to that appointment on time, I have another set in the drawer. 30 seconds. Kubler-Ross, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. You and I do that every single day, many, many times through the day. The struggle for us comes when we have these big, all-encompassing grief processes and changes that happen like are happening now, that it's really difficult for us. But we're good at it. We all are experts. I'm not the expert, as Danny said in the beginning. You are all the experts in your own grief and how to get through it. We're just working the program together here. Grief is natural. It's in the natural world. I grew up in the country. My mom early on got me 2 little baby ducks that I raised up. Well, when they were grown up to adults, one of them was hit by a car, and the driver must have taken the body over and put it up on the top of the bank next to the road. That other duck went and sat with the duck for 3 days. Grief is in the natural world, and it's necessary. You can do it now. Well, the old ad said you can pay me now or you can pay me later, but we're going to pay at some point. Grief work is hard work. It's not fun. It's not riding the roller coaster. And it's so much easier and more complete when we do it now when we're in it, rather than trying to put it off. Can't end in a church presentation without talking about the good news, but I got a bad surprise for you here. This is not the good news you're thinking. The good news is that grief never ends. So why do I say that? Don't throw me out just yet. Because if you ask me today about my mom, I'll tell you about the name that she used to call me. I won't tell you, but I can tell you about that name. Or about the way she would take her hand and rub it on the side of my cheek. And a tear comes to my eye, and I remember that beautiful, beautiful memory. My grief today is so much different than 11 years ago when she died. I can sometimes do something silly, pick up a paper, look at my toothbrush in a way, and all of a sudden I get this wave of grief that comes over me about something in my life. It happens to all of us like that. It never, just because we get through it, doesn't mean that it goes away, because it's always around. I bet you years from now, we will laugh and there'll be all kinds of memes and jokes and everything about COVID-19 and boy, we got through that, didn't we? And wasn't that horrible? And it never ends. So with that, I will close and say thank you. Encourage you to make a new tradition. We're making a new tradition right now with this Zoom presentation, and church on Zoom, and electronic and Facebook and streaming. Say no. It's okay to say, you heard it from me today. It's okay to say no. Take care of yourself, to practice self-care. If you just need some time, take it. Remember, this is a full-time job we're involved in. With open hands and hearts, may you find some richness and blessing in this COVID time together.
So that was lots of thank yous coming in the chat. Any thoughts or responses to the information that Ted was sharing? Was it surprising? Was it?
It was comforting.
Yeah.
Comforting.
Good.
Very comforting. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. It's hard to remember that we are really all in this together.
Yeah.
Especially when we're quarantined. That makes it so much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yep.
Good.
Go ahead, Rick.
I didn't have a question, but
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought your box was lit up.
no.
Go ahead, Ronette.
I
was wondering, I was always taught that in grief process that you have to go through each and every one of the processes, not necessarily in order, but you have to kind of hit each one of those in order to fully come out with some form of healing. Is that, did I hear you say that you do not have to?
I did say that. And the reason for that is that it's several-fold. The first off, Ronette, is if we say you have to go through all of them, then people get focused on working through all of those things, and they may miss some really important truths somewhere else in the process for them. And, you know, for whatever reasons, I'm conflict avoidant in my life, primarily. And so I'm not looking to get angry with people. I have to attend a little more to anger when I'm in the grief process. But I will tell you, if I'm going to rank them, it's one of the lower ranked ones that I'm going through in my life.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I do actually have a question. Knowing that not everyone here is a preacher or pastor, but I'm wondering, especially during this COVID time, is it best to try to identify the grief process that we know people are going through? And I ask that because I've had several people from the church I'm currently serving tell me that they don't want to talk about grief right now, that there's grief that they're going through in their lives other than COVID, and it's just too overwhelming to think that COVID now is adding to their grief. And so I'm wondering, what is the best way to, to tell people that that is what they're actually going through now?
It's a great question, Rick. Thanks for asking it. Well, how I started out was taking all those words about grief and then we call them bad. And I think that's what we're running into a lot of times is when someone says, I don't want to talk about it. It's because why? Because it's too hard. It's too emotional. And I don't know what that means when someone says it's too hard or too emotional. I guess I would take the word too out of that equation. I would say it is hard. It's very hard. And it is emotional to go through it. And my concern is if you don't go through it and you don't experience those emotions and we don't have an opportunity to talk about it, that it will haunt you, that it will that'll end up in negative behaviors toward yourself or toward other people, or negative habits in yourself in terms of how you take care of yourself. And those are my concerns when someone says, no, I just don't want to talk about it. If someone is bawling their eyes out and in the middle of a big emotional expression of grief, I don't want to sit them down and say, well, let's process this right now. That's not the time for that either. But if I am talking to somebody and they say, I just don't want to talk about that now, then I'm going to rely on, yes, this is hard. This is emotional. This is hard work. And we know that if we don't attend to it now, it really does come back to bite us somehow. It always will. We're too complex as human beings to go through this major an experience in our lives and to just walk out of it 2 months from now and say, hey, I'm good. I'm ready to go, Because every time somebody coughs, I'm going to be running the other way,
Right now, I feel that part of the problem is we're so bombarded with the news media. Everything is 19, 19, 19. Sometimes there's a desire just to shut it off.
Right.
A little bit. Whether it's a walk in the park or a special movie or something, but you can't turn your TV on or talk to somebody that they're not wearing a mask or saying something that makes you think, wow, we're still in this thing.
Yes. Yeah, Jerry, that's a great point, really. And I think it's really important that we turn the TV off because unless you're watching a movie or and even, all the major channels now have scrolling across the bottom of the screen, you can't get away from it unless you watch a movie on Netflix or Amazon or something like that. But I support that wholeheartedly. Getting away from that. Look, it's here. We know it. We all know how it's transmitted. We all know what we need to do to take care of ourselves. We know those things. It probably bears repeating for the larger public. But instead of putting yourself in front of that, go take a walk. Exactly right. You know, go do something that's life-giving to yourself. Use some of that energy to close the gap in your life, you know.
Well, like you, we've been going to clean our basement. It's still down there.
I'm with you, buddy. I'm with you.
We made an attempt.
Yeah, I think that's one way that we can really do self-care for ourselves, is to turn the box off, stop listening to all the stuff, stop reading all the articles that people send you. I mean, how many articles do I get a day that somebody sends me? Probably 3, you know, from the Post or the Times or something. And it's like, sheesh. Occasionally I'll scroll through it and see if there's something interesting. I mean, I've sent Danny articles. You know, I know that's bad. That's really bad.
Well, I do think that the things that Danny and Jeff are doing on a daily basis and things that church members are doing to lift our spirits every day is really helping. At least I know it's helping me, and I'm sure it's helping others also.
I agree with you on that. Totally. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This COVID experience has given me a new sense of community in Mount Zion. I think we've always been a tight community, but something just palpably different about it.
I find that I brag about our church to other people because it's been so supportive. The whole church family has just been amazing. And Elaine, I have to tell you that after reading your devotional, it made me feel so good because I had one of those days recently.
A couple weeks ago, hi, I'm Carol. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
A couple weeks ago, I went to McDonald's, and when I went to pay for my order, and you know, you can't go inside, you have to go to the window. I handed them my card, and they shoved it back at me, and they shoved the machine through the window. And they said, you stick it in yourself. And I said, I can't reach it. And they said, well, we're not allowed to touch your card. And I said, what? They said, we can't touch your card. If you want to use this card, you need to put it in the machine yourself. I said, what about money? Well, we can sterilize money. And I mean, I got so upset. And I'm very close to my pastor, and I talked to her about it, and I said, I was ready to jump through that window and choke that person because they would not take my card. I mean, I felt offended. And the woman in the car behind me started honking her horn, and she said, oh, stop complaining. And, well, I really wanted to rip into her. But when I talked to my pastor, I told her, I said, I don't know what got into me. I was really ready to go after these people. And I have nothing against McDonald's. And she said, Carol, you're grieving.
Mm.
She said, you're grieving. I said, what do you mean? She said, this whole thing. She said, every time you turn around, you go to the grocery store. Now you can only go down this way. You can't go in the way you've always gone in. Now
Right.
You have to go down this way. You have to follow the arrows. Don't forget your mask. Keep 6 feet apart. And after I thought about it, I thanked her. I said, thank you for validating me, because I felt so much better after I told her how I felt, and admitted. I mean, at first I felt really guilty for acting that way. I mean, my God, you're a Christian and you're flipping out about this, and you know what kind of a person? And she said, Carol, you're grieving. You've had a lot of things to deal with. This is just one more thing. And she said, but you're grieving. So, you know, it's okay. It's okay to feel the way you feel. And it really helped. It really did. But I'll tell you what, this thing that you just did with us, this was awesome.
Great.
It really was. I really got a lot out of it.
Good. Thank you so
I
much
did
for
too.
sharing that experience. You're very transparent and vulnerable with us, and I appreciate that a lot, because it's in those little moments that we don't expect it, like with McDonald's and a credit card, that you totally lose it. I mean, it's surprising. It's like you didn't go to McDonald's saying, I'm really cranked up, I'm going to give this person a piece of my mind. You know, you went there to get a hamburger and fries, you know?
Especially when I brought my dog with me.
There you go. Right, right. But it's like, it would be somehow good if we could remember every day that we're in a pretty deep grieving process right now. And so is everybody around us. So remember the image about pushing your sponge into the liquid on the table, that everybody's sponge does that a little differently.
Mhm.
So my wife Beth and I, we have real different ways of pushing our sponges into stuff, real different ways. And it's important for us to just recognize that's my way, that's her way. Both of them are absolutely okay.
Would you say that again, please?
No, once and done, once and done. Oh, my.
Oh, and I have a house to clean up too. Kind of goes with the territory, I guess.
Yeah, most people I talk to have this whole long list of good intentions that we've really not gotten
Well.
to very well.
I'm retired, and one of these days I'll get around to it. That's how I look at it.
Good
Not
luck.
on my priority list right now, you know?
You could all be like Danica and go to the beach.
Yeah, there you go.
What'd he say?
Be like
So we
Danica
can
and go to
all
the
be
beach.
Go to the
Go to
beach.
the beach. My family was supposed to be at Ocean City, Maryland this week.
Oh,
Yeah. So, but we rescheduled for October, so hopefully we'll get there by then.
Good, good.
Is there any other comments or questions? Well, I am so grateful for everybody that joined on, and thank you so much,
Yeah.
Ted.
You're very welcome.
I'm wondering if we could, Ted, would you mind closing us in prayer?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Let's join together. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for this day. Give you thanks for the beauty of your creation that you have entrusted to our care. In this time of deep grief and change that we are all in the middle of, Lord, we cannot see our way out. We don't know what the end looks like. We don't know what an outcome will be. But in this, we trust in you. We rely on each other and our congregations, because ultimately we rely on you for your word of truth, for your touch of peace, and for your hand of comfort. All these things we pray in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone. And if you want to revisit this, I will have it up on the Mt Zion website. Take a couple days just to get it formatted for the website. But thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, Ted.
Uh-huh.
Have a great night, everybody. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you. See you, Jeff.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Danny.
Bye.